Putin's evil plan has been rebelled. Russia has been betrayed by its greatest ally. Chechens have begun to rebel against the Russian army. When Putin is, he went crazy with anger. A red alert has been declared for meetings with minority people. A very big decision was passed by parliament as part of the mobilization when Putin experienced a betrayal from his only trusted ally. The invasion attempt in Ukraine took a huge blow. Russia is literally cornered. In the last days of the Russian-Ukraine war, the world began to resonate with a very big news. One of the largest parts of the Russian army has decided to switch sides. While it's known that Russia will do in this situation, while the general course of the war is going so badly, it's predicted that this move will change the course of the war. It's already beginning to be seen that its battle has caused huge problems in strategic regions. Ukraine's mobilization to protect its country by standing behind its rightful cause since the beginning of the world has attracted the attention of the whole. The way that the Ukrainian army, which handled this invasion from the point of view of national unity and togetherness, followed to turn it into an advantage, was appreciated by everyone. The reason why Ukraine is supported by all countries in foreign policy and can even get support from many countries that are considerate Putin is that Ukraine has agreed right to be under occupy. The unjust occupation of Ukraine has taken a huge amount of space in the world press. All kinds of equipment needed by Ukrainian soldiers were provided in a short time, and this helped with Ukraine to be ahead in the war. But Russia experienced a great battle even from the closest country during the Russia has had three basic elements in its army since the beginning of the war. The first of them are Russian soldier, the second is Chechen, and the third is the Wagner Masonry Group. But the allegations that have been put forward recently were a proof that Russia did this on purpose propose. Since the beginning of the war, Russia has started to put Russian youth in the second place in mobilization. This situation was described as a plan that Russia has actually been working on for a long time. To the minorities in Russia, Putin has long wanted to take steps to organize a genocide, but he couldn't do this situation because he knew that it'll cause a huge echo in the world today. But Russia's Ukrainian war has created a situation of a nature that we allow it to do this. As a part of Azation, Russia began to use minorities within the Federation as soldiers for itself. So there is actually a reason why Russia has suffered so many casualties since the beginning of the war, because Russia doesn't really infantry. The issue of the worthlessness of this infantry is not an issue to be taken lightly. This shows that the life of any Russian soldiers fighting is not worth it, which I cannot accuse success in any operation because this situation allows the soldiers in the Russian army to fight without having a necessary motive at, just like the data we are looking at right now. But a minority group that fell in this way began to rebel against the Russian army. This rebellion has reached a quality that completely ignores the successes on certain fronts. This unexpected move came from the Chechen, whom put in trust. Very much Chechens make up a significant majority of the Russian army. Now, the reason for this is that Karo was raised by Putin. This name, which is head of Chechen, can leave there thanks to the prestige position brought it by his father. Otherwise, Chechens hardly like Karu at all. The fact that Karu is pro-Russian is a bad of his father because Karu's father died a result of an assassination. Elite, the organized by Putin Raw orphanage. This situation has caused a lot of trouble and ensured that the only name that, as I say in the administration, is pro-Russian. In other words, the vast majority of Chon are actually hostile to Putin, but are followers of Karo. The change in this balance has happened after the developments that have taken place in a very short period of time. The commander of one of the Chon groups that has sworn to fight against Putin decided to cross from Syria to Ukraine. A primary reason why this is of critical importance is that a commander who is experienced and in fighting against can make very important moves in the war, and in other respects, he has a structure that will create an alternative to Karo. This will allow Chechens who hate Putin to gradually move to the other side in a short time, which is how things have already started to move forward. Thousands of Chechens began to cross towards the Ukrainian side, because in the Russian army, both secondary Chechens do not like to fight being traded as a class soldier and without safety of life. Instead of losing their lives for a war that does not belong to them, they prefer to continue their own war against Putin. This situation has led to another decision that shocks Putin, because it drives him crazy for anger. Another important element that makes up the Russian army is the Wagner Mercenary Group. This group is a group founded by Yevgeny Pico and serves the Russian army, and the mercenaries of this group, where they get their money from, is a very big problem. Wagner selects his soldiers either from prisons or retired soldiers. This situation prepares the ground for the occurrence of very great crimes during the war, but Russia has lost many soldiers that Wagner no longer has a source to find soldiers. Therefore, as a result of the new decisions passed in Chechens, soldiers cannot now be taken from women's prisons in Russia as a part of the mobilization. This situation has started to bring about very big problems within Russia, although the Russian people resist Putin's decision because they do not want such a thing. It's known that that Putin has taken this kind of solution to solve the military's shortage. With the series increase in protests, Putin's attempt to suppress the people by using brute force instead of responding to the people's wishes has once again shown the world how anti-democratic his administration is. According to war analysts, this is a big enough problem to bring about the end of Russia. None of the anti-democratic countries can last long. If an individual doesn't feel himself in the administration of the country at this age, he wants to take steps to change the administration. This poses a huge problem for dictators like Putin because many countries such as Russia are close to the outside and are ruled only by dictators with such traditional thoughts. In other words, if Ukraine's victory over Russia allows Putin to fall from, rebellions may rise from many countries in Central Asia. This in turn can offer a solution so radical that it can complete the end of the dictatorship in the Eastern Bloc. The only thing Putin has done is a solution to this situation in his insistence on invading Ukraine, but this insistence is too unwarranted to be enough. Just as Putin's unnecessary stop bonus cannot solve anything, its aim at completely ending Russia's prestige foreign policy. Next sensational news. Ukraine entered Crimea. Putin was serious when he heard about this unthinkable operation. Very serious decisions have been made regarding Crimea. The people of Crimea started to revolt against Russia. The Ukrainian operation caused serious damage to the ships in sea. Russia's hands are tied in the Black Sea. Ukraine's latest operation will end the war. In the last stages of the Russian-Ukrainian war, the Ukrainian army has established a huge idea over Russia. This is mainly due to Ukraine's ability to use its capabilities to the fullest. In response to occupying Russian army withdrew from 70% of the territory it had occupied for a long time. Many of the munitions left behind by the withdrawal have been transferred to the Ukrainian armies. Immediately after these steps, the Russian army took a defensive posture on orders from the Kremlin. In other words, Ukraine's current position could bring the war to Russian territory. With its latest operation, Ukraine has dealt a very serious blow to Russia. What stands out in Ukraine's recent operations is its intelligence. Ukrainian intelligence, which receives special training from Israeli and U.S. intelligence, has now reached a completely different. Russia, on the other hand, does not seem to be making the slightest effort to resolve this situation. Many of Ukraine's successes are due to the Russian intelligence not doing enough work, but with the slightest operation, the Ukrainian army has once again emphasized that crime belongs to them. Ukraine has been preparing for this operation for a long time. The whole world was expecting another operation similar to the previous ones as the Ukrainian army's sensitivity about what Crimea was, but no one could have imagined that Ukraine would go this far. According to the Ukrainian intelligence, Russia was keeping its fleet of warships in Seville. Having learned about the situation, Ukraine mobilized to organize an operation in that area. Many destroyers in that region were preparing the ground for Russia to dominate the Black Sea. If these were destroyed, Russia's dominance in the Black Sea would be completely over. Realizing this, Ukraine began to prepare an ingenious. The plan was based on New Brain's entry into Sevastopol. The anti-Russian group Fire Group in Crimea was contacted in advance to ensure that no one would be affected by the bombardment. The Fire Group was instructed to completely evacuate the settlements near Sevastopol harbor in the time frame of the operation. This once again demonstrated Ukraine's respect for civilians even and war. The Ukrainian military sent directors to Sevastopol and Dublasy to determine the route of the operation. Realizing that the Russian troops in this region were not waiting for the entrance to Crimea here, the Ukrainian army to send a very large fleet to this region. The ingenious plan of the Ukrainian army started at this point. The Ukrainian army mobilized the fleet. It was Santa. While Brain's fleets were moving, Ukrainian special forces set up long-range Patriots. This would allow them to directly hit the port of Seville. The landing ships in the fleet were to clear the remaining Russian troops and ammunition at the interior of Grima. But at this point, the Ukrainian army fell victim to a slight miscalculation. As the Ukrainian fleet began to approach Grime, orders were given for the Patriots' long-range Patriot missiles were on their Sevastopol harbor. It was around this time that the Russian ministry informed Moscow of this operation before the jammers kicked in. But it was too late for them to get support. The Ukrainian army was about to arrive when the Patriots landed in the harbor. 4 of the destroyers in the harbor were completely. The Ukrainian army left 1 ship behind for bombardment and continued towards the harbor with 4 landing craft. Ville harbor was destroyed. This successful Ukrainian operation had just begun. Ukrainian special forces deployed as soon as the port came ashore and set out to give the Russian soldiers in that and 11 calories. Grenades were waved towards the Russian ammunition depot, which had been detected in. The Russian army, whose ammunition exploded, started to retreat in armored vehicles. After that, the Ukrainian army started to carry everything they could be used against the Russians in the harbor to the landing ship. It completely blew up the ships they were going to leave behind. Russia no longer had a chance to repair the ships. Since the Ukrainian special forces were successful in the operation, they decided to move a little. In this area, they started fighting side by side with the Crime in Opposition Fire Group, which has recently become famous for its fire actions. After making sure that the building designed for the accommodation of Russian soldiers in that area was empty, they blew it up completely. After the Ukrainian army advanced a little further, there was information that a very large unit was moving towards the Ukrainian army from the bearer side. Upon hearing, the Ukrainian army immediately began to retreat. The fire group put on civilian clothes and continued to operate in Crimea. The Vayan troops set up with the landing ships to return to Odessa. When Russian troops arrived in Spo, they missed the Ukrainians by half an hour. Although this made Putin very angry, the importance of the directors was once again. With the return of the Ukrainian troops, Zelensky has mobilized for huge celebrations. Sevastopol was described as about to be liberated from enemy occupation. The next move of the Ukrainian army will be to expel Russia from Crimea completely with the necessary ammunition. The Russian army has no chance against Ukraine, but these latest developments have made Putin very. Putin has declared a state of emergency in the Crimea region. When he learned that a group inside Crimea was supporting Ukraine, he got even more angry and sent KGB agents to that region. As a result of the investigations, the existence of an unidentified fire group was identified. This group was characterized as a terrorist group by the Kremlin administration when Russia started to apply harsher policies in crime. Crimea was completely confused when the people in Crimea started to revolt. Putin sent special forces to suppress the rebellion in this region, but a mistake by the Russian National Guard made the people even angrier. According to war analysts, every country has its own climate. Violent Russia. This climate has led to harsh treatment of protesters. It is not the same in Crimea. Crimea is very troubled about these, because it is not entirely clear how Putin's rule will continue. This harsh rule in Crimea has helped the fire group to gain more followers of our. No one in Crimea wants to be ruled by Russia anymore. This kind of harsh rule is something that Ukraine has never done before, so this is not the kind of climate that can handle it. The general tolerance of the population has led to a harsh reaction to this kind of activity. It is not known how long a group which has never faced dictatorship in any period will put up with Putin, since it is not known exactly how the steps taken by Russia in this field will continue. It has become a matter of time for Russia to come to our impasse. All nations in Russia see Putin's resignation as the only solution, but it is not now how the solution will play. While Putin's resignation is being discussed even by the deputies in the Kremlin, it is not possible for the administration to be healthy. People in Russia have started to worry not only about their government, but also about saving their own lives. The Iranian army's long-range Patriot missiles have a range that reaches Moscow, which seriously worries the Russian people. This explains Putin most now that Moscow is in. He's placed an air defense system on every street corner in Moscow. He thinks that these systems will save Moscow, but he has no idea what Ukraine can do now, and it is known that the Kremlin is now cornered. And the next intel. Bad news for Russia. Poland has started preparations. Putin's most important ally is under great threat. Poland has pulled thanks to the border with Belarus in this incident that shocked the world. Belarus violated the borders. Eastern Europe has come. Better was asked to Russia for reinforcement vehicles and ammunition with an urgent request for help. Putin, who gave the soldiers in Sor here, received an unexpected blow. Ukraine made history once again with this operation. In the last days of the Russian-Ukrainian war, there have been very big double moons. It is known that Russia has been doing many activities to disrupt the peace in the world. In response, the Ukrainian army is working closely with Western Sea to get the necessary support while Russia is supporting countries in its region to gain allies. This time the Russian army's move to use all the advantages at its disposal has created great tension all over the world. After that, Poland started to make unexpected moves, one after the other. It decided to intervene in a possible threat by placing Leopard 2s, purchased from Germany, on the border with BEUs. Realizing this, BEUs asked Russia for, after invading Ukraine, the plans of the Russian army, which was mobilizing for a very big invasion plan in that region, were deciphered. After these plans were revealed, Poland started to make moves that would disrupt all of Russia's plans. When they directed part of the army towards Belarus, things got completely confused. Russia had to make a choice at this point. If Russia relocated its troops in the occupation zone, its plan in Ukraine would have. But if Russia did not help Belarus, Belarus would be in serious regional trouble. Russia made a very wrong choice at this point. There was a huge confusion on the Polish-Belarusian border. Some soldiers in the Belarusian army violated Poland's borders. After detecting this situation, Poland marched its entire army to the borders of Challenge to the other side. In response, Bader was forced to retreat. Bader was asked Russia for help and was sent vehicles and ammunition from Sold. But when Ukrainian intelligence, which had been working intensively here, noticed this development, it would create a very serious problem for Russia. As they rose on the border, Russia's big invasion plan was completely thwarted. After that, Ukraine started to prepare for an operation because the tension on the Polish-Berian border had not been this high for a long time. Immediately afterwards, Putin held a secret meeting with Ba. As troops on the Soar front dwindled, the Ukrainian army sent Beras to the area for detection and reconnaissance. Based on the information provided by the Beras, it was determined that Russia had indeed left very few troops at the military headquarters in that area. This was a very serious opportunity for the Ukrainian army to achieve victory, since it was not known what kind of operation the Ukrainian troops were going to organize. Russia was going to completely turn down the opportunity for an operation in this area. Ukrainian troops set out to capture the Russian military outquarters. The outquarters, which was almost simply with very few soldiers, was blocked with the activation of jammers. In response, Russian soldiers waved white flag. This military out corridors and many of examination and vehicles were taken from the conflict and transferred to the Ukrainian inventory. Considering that this inventory would be used against the Russian army, Putin's critical mistake would again put a strain on his troops. But Putin was very angry at this move of Ukraine. Immediately afterwards, he started to take very big decisions. Intelligence confirmed that Russia had been driving an invasion map after Ukraine for a long. It was therefore recognized by the whole world that the Ukrainian army was of critical importance. If Ukraine was invited, many Eastern European countries would be next. Therefore, Ukrainian troops needed constant reinforcement and support in terms of equipment and ammunition. Once the Ukrainian troops had decided what kind of flat, the United States immediately began to send a lot of missiles and military support. This allowed the Ukraine to have a more modern and stronger army. This began to feed a very strong resistance to Russia's withdrawal from the territories it had occupied since February 24th. With these latest territorial losses, it was not known what kind of plan Russia was following. When Ukraine was invaded by Russia, a significant amount of territory was taken by Russian. Immediately after this, Ukraine mobilized to stop the invasion and push the Russians back from 70% of the territory they had occupied since the beginning of the war. As a result of Russia losing all the advantages it had gained, the Ukrainian army began to march on Russia again and again. But with the latest support Ukraine has received, it has signaled that the war may now spread to Russia's borders. Since the beginning of the war, the U.S. has said it would not be able to provide some military support. In response, the Ukrainian army had to make many moves in many ways. Finally, the U.S. changed its mind and moved to deliver a very critical piece of ammunition. This was a weapon that scared Putin very much, because if this weapon fell into the hands of Ukraine, Moscow would be in Ukraine's range. This made Putin very. The vessels that the U.S. did not want to give were the long-range Patriots. Since it was out that the UKI army wanted to hit Moscow with these Patriots, Russian troops began to mobilize air defense systems began to be installed on every street corner in Moscow. This was Putin's admission that he had lost the war. If Putin is afraid of an attack by Ukraine, it means that he's losing the war. According to war analysts, many critical moves are being rebuffed by. This means that Putin is unable to make many moves he wants to make. While Ukraine has the upper end on many issues, Russia's activities have started to complicate things completely. Russia was doing its best to divide the countries of the world into two blocks, but it could not stop the advantages that Ukraine was gaining. In return, Russia was known to have made big deals with Iran, which led to big warnings from Western Sea. Iran is a country that has not been banned from armed trade, but Russia violated these prohibitions and pursued about 1,000 unaugmented vehicles from Iran. This was one of the sides that Russia was entering a major crisis. There was only one reason why the country, which had one of the largest arms industries in the world, direct the Soviet Union, fell into this situation, and that's Putin failed admittance. Putin, the Russian leader who has a very westernized leader in the early years of his rule and made many breakthroughs in many areas, is now in the last days of his rule. In the beginning, Putin tried to bring the country to a very different point. But in these last days, it has started to be seen that he's no longer as innovative and successful as he used to be. But the most important point here is Putin's roadmap. In the past, Putin used to be admired all over the world for his tactics and war, but now he's a leader who is remembered only for his failures. While he used to receive huge embargoes from many countries, it has been found that things have changed completely. The new superpowers of Central Asia have started to overtake Russia, saying that Russia is losing all of its advantages one by one. Satellite countries are trying to figure out what if Ukraine succeeds, all of them will mobilize the rise up against Russia, and this mobilization will be another blow to Putin after.